The open road hides more than just miles. It hides the unbelievable. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where true stories drift through the static of the night. Tonight, we bring you 7 unbelievable horror trucker stories, chilling accounts from foggy highways, silent truck stops, and endless stretches of road where reality twists into something else. Before we begin, we've set a goal: let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. If you're new here, subscribe to the Sleep Haunt and join us for every eerie mile ahead. Now, settle in, breathe slow, and listen. The road has stories you won't believe. Story number 1. The interstate was clean as a ribbon snipped by moonlight, smooth and empty. The kind of deep night that turns reflective paint into its own small universe. Mara kept her rig at a steady 65, hands loose on the wheel, shoulders easy from a day that had only asked for patience. The dash glowed soft green. The cup of coffee in the holder had gone lukewarm an hour back, but the scent clung to the cab like a friendly cloud. She was a careful driver, the sort who counted exits without meaning to, who knew which rest areas had vending machines that ate bills, and which ones glittered with well-stocked fridges and a clean place to wash her hands. It was the hour when the radio didn't talk much. Static swelled and smoothed out, like wind tracing wheat, and the occasional voice slid across the band, too far to make out, too near to ignore. Mara let it be. Ahead, the reflector posts popped in her headlights one by one. She checked her mirrors, then checked the sky. Far behind, a pair of lights drifted like 2 stars that couldn't quite commit to a constellation. The first sign came up on the right with a quiet authority. Exit 109. Dawson Ridge Gas. Food. She didn't need either. Her tank was good to the morning. She had a sandwich wrapped in wax paper in the cooler and a handful of almonds within reach, and the delivery window gave her time to sleep somewhere quiet. She passed the sign. The little arrow under Dawson Ridge pointed at a ramp that rose like a staircase into shade. 2 miles later by the odometer, there it was again. Exit 109, Dawson Ridge Gas Food. Mara lifted her foot just a breath. Not enough to slow, just enough to notice the long silence inside that followed surprise. The second sign looked exactly like the first. The same font, the same faded blue field, a little weathering at the lower right that formed a shape like a leaf. She checked for a frontage road that could have merited a repeated sign. Nothing. The grass along the shoulder fell away to open fields, and far out, the line of a windbreak rolled like a horizon pulled closer. Mara glanced at the dash clock. 2:40 a.m. Fine. She glanced again a minute later. 2:40 a.m. She frowned. The radio was eco-wired to the dash, and interference sometimes made the clock skip. She tapped the display. It didn't change. A little laugh passed her lips, not quite amused, not quite worried. She flicked on the low beams and off, watching the dashboard settle back into its regular glow. Ahead, the world slid on. Another mile marker passed. 108. She had seen 108 earlier, maybe. Maybe not. The kilometers printed beneath meant little to her, except on nights when numbers calmed the mind. The road didn't feel wrong. It felt perfect, peeled away of everything but pace. The second sign gathered beyond the next rise like a thought returning. Exit 109, Dawson Ridge Gas Food. She said nothing, to no one. She did not use the word loop. Loops lived on the radio, in stories traded at bright diners with big windows where the reflection of pie cases sit beside the night. She kept her speed. When the ramp came, she watched it curl away and ignored it again, because exit plans change a driver's day, and she did not plan to change anything. CB19 whispered a few calls, a distant weather report that sighed its way through her speaker, forecasts for counties she had just left, and then a hush. A song wandered in through another frequency, the tail end of a melody she did not know. A few clear notes like someone trying to remember how the next part went. Air breathed through the vents, warm and clean of the day's heat. She rolled her neck. Her truck liked nights. So did she. The clock said 2:40 a.m. again. A billboard on the right pitched a motel that had probably been demolished a decade back. She remembered its white horse logo only because it had always been less a horse than a suggestion of one. She had passed it exactly once before. the horse nodding, never really looking at anything, as if halfway through a bow that took 20 years to finish. The thought brushed her skin. That was the kind of detail drivers kept. When a horse on a billboard repeats, a person notices. Her hands tightened on the wheel. The next green sign appeared. Exit 109 Dawson Ridge Gas Food. The arrow held its angle. Beyond it, the sky lay low, in the way some skies do after a day of heat, as if tired, folded down. She decided, without announcing it even inside, to try something small. She tapped the brake twice. Not enough to change anything, just enough to add herself into the pattern as something new. Her tail lights flickered. The highway took the offering without comment. The sign went by. The ramp opened and shut. The road held. The clock, still unhelpful, clung to 2:40 like a rock holds a shadow. Mara checked the shoulder line, then the center line, the way one checks a lane when it narrows. Everything true. She eased the rig down 1 mile per hour. Another. If time refused to inch forward, she would. Mile marker 108. The white horse billboard, the way the paint had cracked along the curve of its neck, and then the green. Exit 109, Dawson Ridge Gas Food. She spoke then, not to a person, but to the cab, the way a person does when loneliness and habit shake hands. "All right," she said. The voice sounded calm. "You win. Let's see Dawson Ridge." Her blinker ticked, polite as rain. She set her weight and took the ramp, feeling the long body of the truck follow, the whole machine leaning into the turn like a single thought. The ramp curved down into trees. Past the last post in the guardrail, darkness gathered differently, softer, like curtains in a window. Nobody had opened in a very long time. Her lights brushed a sign for a diner with a name that made her think of church potlucks and summer produce. There should have been a gas station. The promise of it hung somewhere near, just off to the right. At the bottom, a four-way stop glowed with a single bulb that swung gently as if somebody had bumped the pole a day ago, and the movement still hadn't made up its mind about ending. To the left, the world looked like towns do when everyone is asleep. A main street stitched with angled spots and heavy awnings. A pharmacy with a clock in the window that nobody set. A mural of a river that looked like a new stripe of paint done by careful hands. To the right, a few houses knelt behind trimmed hedges, as if waiting for a school bus that would never come. She rolled to the stop. In the glass of a dark storefront, the reflection of her rig floated, quiet and confident. Seeing your truck in the dark always felt like catching sight of a friend who had been walking beside you the whole time. She pulled up, angle perfect, a habit as old as her early rides with a mentor who had said, "Make your turns gentle and tight, and anything that follows you will feel safe." The diner sat where a diner ought to sit, at the corner where locals would loop in and out on their morning, where the smell of bacon and pancakes could drift into a town like a promise. Its sign hummed. The word open flickered. On, off, on. No cars in the spots, no truck in the gravel lot beside, no waitress on a cell phone near the back door, taking a breath of brisk dark. But the porch light burned. Mara killed her engine. The sudden silence rose up like a lake under a boat. The faint tick of a cooling manifold punctuated it. Familiar, and minding its own business. She stepped down, boots on gravel. The air held a low warmth, the memory of a day that had been really something, held still by the hush. Her hand touched the diner's door. It gave a little, the simple give of a door that had welcomed more people than it turned away. The bell above it gasped and tinkled a little, as if clearing its throat for a morning that hadn't come yet. Inside, the booths kept their quiet like well-kept promises. A napkin holder gleamed tiredly. The pie case at the end of the counter shone like a suggestion of sweetness. There was no one. There was no sign of that not being of someone having just stepped into the kitchen, the kind of warmth objects keep when hands have been near. She said nothing. She breathed. She listened to the low hum of refrigeration, then realized there was no refrigeration. The hum belonged to the light outside, the porch bulb unsettled. She looked at the clock over the grill. 2:40. The second hand lifted, then lowered, like a slow nod. Sleep had a way of inviting itself on nights like this. Mara felt it in the kind of yawn that moves through shoulders first. She knew better than to press on when her body asked for an hour. Sometimes an hour made the difference between a clean route and a story told over coffee with laughter that didn't quite stick. She returned to the truck, climbed in, set her shades just so, settled in the bunk, and closed her eyes. The diner sign clicked. On. Off. On. She let the sound count sheep for her. Sometime later, or just then, she woke. The air was different, thinner, the way dawn rearranges breath. Her clock finally surrendered and read 5:12 a.m. Outside, blue had seeped into the black, turning shapes into places. Birds had begun the sort of choir that doesn't care what people bring to the day. It will make a morning for itself. Mara rolled, sat up, and stretched. She washed her face at the little sink and brushed her hair into a loose braid, looped through muscle memory. When she slid back into the seat, the diner looked like any closed spot before opening. Clean, quiet, door locked. Had it been unlocked? Had she gone in? The bell in her memory sounded crystal clear. She turned the key. The engine obliged, settling into her like a loyal animal coming to heel. She pulled onto the main street. The exit back to the interstate lay past a sign that gave history in 2 lines. Dawson Ridge, established 1911, Pop, 2014. The number made her smile. Round enough to be tidy. The ramp rose. Morning took the night strange and tucked it somewhere where it couldn't catch the corner of her eye. On the highway, cars appeared as if summoned by the light. 2 sedans from the city, a farm truck with hay loaded neat and high. The radio woke more fully and gave weather that matched what she could see bounded by her windshield. The CB offered small talk in the usual, where you headed? Watch for a trooper at mile 137. Mara shook her head at herself and took a long drink of water to rinse away the last taste of the dream, if dream it was. The billboard with the white horse came and went. The horse bowed, polite as always. At the next rest area, she pulled in. The light was wide now, the sort that flatters even old concrete. She stretched her legs and rolled her shoulders, then stepped to the passenger side and opened the small locker where she kept the odd little things she picked up on routes. A clean stone from a riverbank, a bottle cap from a brand she'd never seen again, a pressed sprig of cedar that had perfumed a winter once. If she had dreamed the bell, fine. If she had napped in a town that was somehow less or more than a town, fine. If time had knit itself, shifting a stitch just so, and drawing her along, also fine. She tucked the thought into the same place where drivers keep the things they tell no one, not out of fear, but because the telling would bruise it. The dash cam footage loaded into her phone over a minute. She did not usually watch it. Today she did. The camera saw what cameras see. The highway. The sign. Exit 109. Dawson Ridge. Her blinker. The ramp bending down. Gravel. A door. Light. And, in between, 3 lots of highway, 3 loops of 2 miles or so, where she had not turned. Each loop looked like the others, except for the tiniest variations a person could make without realizing, the blink of her taillights when she tapped them, the exact way her hand drifted to the radio dial and away, the angle of her head as she watched the mirror and the sky both. 3. The number sat warm in her palm. That afternoon, on the far side of the delivery, a driver at a fuel island asked if she ever stopped at Dawson Ridge. He said the pie used to be the best in 3 states. His tone made it sound like a confession. Mara said she couldn't say, but she thought of the pie case, shining, and the bell clearing its throat, and the porch bulb humming. She thought of the clock that had been glad to shift at last. Days later, at nearly the same hour, miles and miles away, her CB woke with a tone she had no name for, round and soft, like air moving over the mouth of a bottle. The band was busy with chatter. A gap opened. In the gap, a voice spoke so kindly it would have been easy to miss, almost a sigh from her own vent. "Thanks for the orange." It was steady, calm, familiar, the way gravel knows the underside of a boot. She glanced at the passenger footwell. An orange sat in a little plastic bag from a truck stop. She could have sworn she'd eaten her last one. Mara drove on, the white line stitched forward into the cool dark. The road rose and fell like a quiet tide. Past a sign about a rest area still 2 exits ahead, The knight hesitated, then let her go. Story number 2. Night had thinned to that grainy hour, when the dark lets hints of color through. When the reflectors along the shoulder look less like stars and more like what they are, glass catching what little light there is. Emmett rolled east on a stretch of highway he knew by the names of rivers more than numbers. He had laundry clipped and drying behind his seat, a thermos lid cupped in the dash holder, and a steady hum under his feet that said the engine was content. The air outside edged toward cool, towing the scent of hay and wet dirt. In the mirror, nothing but his own trailer and a mild suggestion of sky. His transponder chirped. The little green puck on his windshield lit with a polite pulse, the kind of sound that hardly asked for attention. Scale in 2 miles. He glanced at the sign as it swam out of darkness. Way station 2 miles. Next to it, the smaller board flashed. Closed bypass. Easy enough. He let his cruise ride. Somewhere in the hedgerow of frequencies, the CB worked through weather and a man's voice telling a joke with a hitch in it, like he'd forgotten the end and was trying not to let anyone down. He passed the 1 mile sign. Closed. Bypass. The stainless tankers ahead of him kept their lanes. The scale house, when it arrived, dozed in sodium light, windows pale, orange cones tucked against the curb. The big sign over the lane read, "Closed," in letters that didn't leave room for argument. Emmett spared it only as much thought as anyone gives a familiar building with its lights off. A quilt of fields rolled out after the ramp. A little town's water tower rose to the left, a star and a word painted on its belly. He let the miles fold under him, headlights laying ribbon over the dark. When the transponder chirped again, he looked up out of habit more than need. It shouldn't have chirped. Ahead, a portable sign clicked on, letters crawling across a black panel like insects learning to form a word. Scale open, all trucks. An arrow blinked to the right, steady, patient. Emmett lifted his foot, but didn't move his hands. He had not passed a turnoff. He had not seen a second station marked on the atlas or the app, but the sign pulsed again with the humility of a suggestion that knew it would be followed. The lane widened. A fresh set of white lines split off to a gravel apron and a low building he didn't recognize, set back from the shoulder behind new fencing. The kind of station built in a hurry after a flood or to test equipment for a season. 2 figures stood in the doorway, silhouettes clean and upright. Emmett moved over and slowed, blinkers ticking. If they wanted to do a cursory check, fine. His paperwork sat sorted, his inspection stickers shown, and he'd slept honest hours that week. A few minutes here could save hassle later down the road. The portable scale pad looked new, black asphalt smooth as poured coffee. He eased onto it, watching the lane lights run from red to amber to green. Then hold him. The first figure, the shorter of the two, lifted a hand and pointed him to park in a slot by the building. Emmett did, feeling the faint rumble of gravel under weight. He shut down, listened to the fan wind its arc to stillness, and stepped down into air that smelled faintly of rain even though the road had been dry for hours. Evening, the taller figure said. The uniform looked true enough. Dark shirt, reflective vest, a patch in the shape of the state over the shoulder. The man's cap had the stiff brim of an unbent new issue. Routine, company pull, won't take long. His voice carried authority, but not impatience. The shorter one, a woman with her hair tucked tight beneath her cap, held a clipboard and did not remove her gloves. Emmett handed over his registration, insurance, and the small envelope that kept everything neat. He set his phone to show the electronic logs on that blue-white screen dispatch preferred. The woman held the clipboard at a tilt, as if the ambient light, weak as an old bulb, wanted help. "Appreciate it," she said. Her tone was warm without play. She glanced at the ELD screen, and then at him, not with suspicion. More like someone looking for a name in a program before the music starts. "If you don't mind, read your last 4 duty status changes aloud." He blinked. "Pardon? Just want to check the sync. Microphones are down in there." She nodded toward the building. "Read them out." It was odd, but not unheard of. Systems acted up. He read them. On duty inspection at 22:14. Driving at 22:33. Off duty at 08 for 15. He scrolled. Driving at 0:23. On duty fuel at 111. He stopped. The order wasn't quite that. He corrected himself. Sorry. On duty fuel at 17. There. There. The taller one marked something invisible on the air with a pen that didn't catch the light. Who taught you to run mountains? He asked. The question slid in with the others like a coin among keys. Old man named Chuck in Missoula, Emmett said before he thought about why he was answering. Threw a loaded flatbed at me in January and said, "Sing to it, don't fight it." The man nodded, as if this matched an answer he already had. Weight's good. Tires read clean. Would you mind stepping in for a quick brake check? We're running sound through a new meter. They led him to the door. Inside, the station felt newer than it looked from the road. The walls were blank of the usual posters. No laminated DOT charts about lengths and hours clocked. No pin board with a county fair flyer lopsided at the corner. Just pale paint and the hum of something that wasn't quite fluorescent, wasn't quite the sound power makes when it rests. The meter looked like a coffee can on its side with a grill. The woman gave him a look that said, "Okay." He set his boot, set his heel, and pressed the pedal. The hiss and settle of air felt right under his calf. The can blinked with tiny lights, red then green, then one small blue that stayed. The woman's gloved finger hovered over her page and pressed down. The page didn't take ink, but it took something. The way sand takes a footprint even when wind wants to smooth it. "Last one," the man said. "Say your name, your first highway, and where you're going." Emmett almost laughed. It sounded like something a child would be asked to practice in school, but the tone required an answer. "Emmett Cole, US 2. I'm taking this load to the yard outside Davenport." "Good," the man said, as if Emmett had managed a corner without dropping a wheel over the line. "You'll have a safe night." The woman handed the clipboard to him, the gesture like sealing an envelope by palm instead of spit. "You're green." He nodded, went back to his cab, and felt the small relief that often follows the conclusion of something simple that could have been complicated. He merged. The portable sign behind him switched from open to a blank black that held the afterimage of letters for a moment, then surrendered to emptiness. The transponder on his windshield did not make a sound. 2 miles, maybe 3. The farmland unrolled. In the east, the idea of morning grew, a softer gray that could have been a mood more than light. His transponder chirped. He glanced up. No sign. Flat road. No ramp. The chirp was not the green he knew. It was its twin with a slightly different upbringing. A yellow that didn't show itself. A tone too polite for alarm and too insistent for trust. He touched the little puck with a thumb, as if that would quiet it. It chirped again. Tiny, exact, like the bird calls young trees learn first. He shrugged. Devices got moody. He turned up the music so it didn't own the cab. The chirp threaded itself anyway. Cardinal red, through a beige cloth. When he stopped for fuel an hour later, it chirped when he opened the door. It chirped when he put his card in. The attendant in the glass box looked up and then down, as if the sound belonged to a memory he didn't want to open. Back on the road, he called dispatch. "You see anything on your end?" "My transponder's having a day." The night dispatcher, a woman who wore her patience like a sweater with wrists pushed up, clicked keys with gentleness he could hear. "Nothing opens on your route till after 10. Your compliance shows all green. Want me to ping your device provider? Let's see if it stops." He didn't want to make a ticket out of something small. The chirp made up its mind for him. It came again and again, with the regularity of a heartbeat you only hear when you start thinking about it. At a rest area, he parked under a light where moths drew arcs like old penmanship. He dropped his visor and touched the puck until its tiny light turned a steady green, then no color at all. He told it, in the tone used with radios and a stubborn faucet, "Knock it off." He closed his eyes. The lot wrapped its particular quiet around him, that stillness heavy with distant highway noise, and the breeze that moves through trees even under bulbs. He was almost asleep when the chirp sounded. Not loud, not even irritating. Just there. In the way a word remains on the tongue after a strong cup of coffee. He got out, stretched. The sky above the light felt painted in with one broad brush, no stars. He walked to the vending machine and bought a bottle of water from a brand he didn't know. The water warming in his hand, he read the community bulletin beside the map. Local hams were organizing a pancake breakfast. A lost dog with a black patch over one eye had been found. A flyer curled at the edge for a volunteer fire department raffle. The dates were all from last year. He touched the corner of the paper and smoothed it, an act more for himself than the sheet. When he climbed back into the cab, a voice crackled on 19, one of those friendly ghosts that pop in and out of range. Any of y'all catch the scale on 81 tonight? Looks new. Folks in there ask funny questions. Emmett waited. Another driver answered, laughing into the tail of his words. What's funny? Ask if you're wearing clean socks? Nah, the first voice said. Ask you where you learned to drive. Ask you to say it loud. Tapped my dash and told me I'd be fine. You pass? Yeah. The channel stitched itself back into weather and the particular arguments of people who know each other by tone. Emmett stared at his transponder. The chirp came again. He put the truck in gear. Town by town, he inched east. The chirp made itself small as he drove daylight, then larger again when shadows lengthened. Past a billboard for a place that sold fireworks all year long, he saw a new sign, its fresh metal and unpebbled paint showing even through dusk. Portable scale ahead. He eased over, more curious than willing. The shoulder shifted to gravel. He looked for the low building, the fence, the neat cones. Nothing. The shoulder widened into a long scar where something had been and was now seed and grit. Grass burned back by a heat that had faded long ago, had crept back in, first in tufts, then in waves. A rectangle of darker dirt marked where a structure had been. A chunk of block sat tilted at a corner, half swallowed. The open sky above it looked earnest, a room that had forgotten its roof. He rolled on slowly, feeling the crunch in his heel through the pedal. The transponder chirped, steady now, as if pleased. He pulled over where the rectangle broadened, killed the engine. When the truck settled, the quiet came in a way that was not quite like the quiet he knew. The breeze hung back a little, cautious about walking through. He sat and let his hands rest, craving that simple roll of knuckles and muscle, then took his phone and typed in the county name and way station. The first result was a story from 6 years back about a spring thaw and a sudden flood. The article showed a photo of a small building shorn off its slab and listed awkwardly in a ditch, cone toppled, wires like hair. The station had been moved 2 counties over. The comments were what you'd expect. Someone joked about a free pass. Someone posted a memory of a father who used to bring donuts to the guards on winter mornings. Someone typed, "Drive safe," 3 times like a wish. Emmett sat a long time, the phone's blue light spent against the night. He lowered it. The dark grew soft. A cricket tried a song and stopped. The transponder chirped, but now he thought he could hear something under it, a tract of sound like a person warming their throat before speaking. He unlocked the door. Night air slid around his face. He didn't step down. He sat and placed both hands on the wheel, as you do when you can't decide whether to move. Words came to him not as answers, but as things that had been said to him years ago and stored. He said them. Not loud. Enough to feel them in his jaw. "I'm Emmett Cole," he said. "I learned to drive on a road that tries you in short ways and then long. I learned from a man who told me to sing to it. I said I would keep my hands easy and my eyes up and write every hour honest. I'm headed to Davenport." He felt foolish, and then less foolish, in the way a person feels when a room is empty, and yet they do a small courtesy holding a door for no one, straightening a rug after no one has walked on it. The transponder chirped once, then made a sound like a breath in, small and complete. It lit green, then dark. Emmett exhaled in a way that made him realize he hadn't been doing it properly. The cricket found its song again. The breeze decided it could come through after all and ran a hand along the grasses like a friend catching up after a long absence. He slept there not long, head tipped back, hat low. In his dream, he stood in a building made of air, with a long counter and the sound of pens that didn't have points. He walked to the door 3 times. Each time, he listened for a bell that didn't exist, then opened onto the highway. Each time it was morning. When he woke, there was light enough to turn the scar of the old station into a field's awkward square of different green. Birds made a bureaucracy of sound in the trees along the ditch. He started the truck. The engine gathered itself without complaint. He pulled off the gravel and back onto asphalt. The portable sign farther down, the one that had flickered letters last night, stood blank and plain as if it had never been wired. He drove. At the next fuel stop, the morning crew pinned name tags to their shirts and called each other by first names that sounded like cousins. A trooper rolled up for coffee and nodded at him, with a friendliness that had decided not to hold anyone's past against them today. Emmett asked as casual as he could, "They planning any pop-up scales along 73? The trooper lifted his cup, thought a moment, and shook his head. "Not that I heard. We lost the old one here in a washout, never rebuilt. Our guys pull randoms down nearer the state line." "Why?" "Just curious," Emmett said. He bought a cinnamon roll, tore it in half, and took it to a bench outside, where a crow hopped and judged him for every bite. The transponder was quiet. The quiet had the shape of something done rather than something forgotten. He ran the rest of his miles with the taste of cinnamon sugar on his tongue. The day lofted and settled, the way days do when you let them. At a merge, a driver hollered on 19, warning about an overturned pallet of empty crates in lane 2. Emmett thanked him without touching the button, the way you thank a person for holding a door. That evening, he checked into a small-run motel he used when routes lined up just so. The clerk slid the key card with an authority the size of the counter, then softened to ask about his family like they had already met. Emmett slept hard, the kind of sleep that tempts the body to do another hour. He woke to a text from a friend. "You ever get the bargain inspection on 73? New station. Folks inside act like school teachers. Felt like I had to tell them something true, or I wasn't getting my sticker." Emmett typed and erased and typed and then sent. "Try answering exactly what they ask. Say it from the start. Might make it smooth." He didn't explain more. He did not want to put teeth on it. He'd had nights before when he found a different kind of scale, the kind that weighed what you carry that isn't freight. Most truckers had. Places where a bridge isn't just a bridge and a bend holds more than a curve. You keep moving. You learn your own rituals for courtesy in those places. You speak names. You set your hands. You remind the road and yourself why you're on it. A week later, near a junction 3 states away, the transponder chirped once, that same half note from the empty night. He looked at it and smiled without meaning to, an expression small enough to keep to himself. A portable sign up ahead lay face down behind a chain. A patch of asphalt near it had the smoothness of something prepared for something that hadn't happened yet. The air was a little sweet with rain, though the sky held Sunday. Emmett tapped the dash with his knuckle, a sound soft and exact. "Copy," he said to the truck, or to the road, or to whoever keeps tally of small promises kept without witnesses. He drove on. He kept his eyes up. He sang to it when the grade tipped, and the green puck on his windshield, polite, quiet, and useful as ever, went about its simple work, leaving him to his. Story number 3. Wind moved like a steady hand across the high plains, combing the grass until it lay in one quiet direction. Inez rode a straight line under a sky that had not yet decided what color to be. The world trimmed in that thin silver you get just before dawn. Her trailer hummed behind her, refrigeration unit keeping a cargo of fresh-cut flowers at a perfect, stubborn temperature. The scent of cold petals hid in the cab, not strong but present, like a memory that lingered without asking for attention. She kept the wheel light, fingers loose, a habit from years of long stretches where nothing happened until suddenly it did. The dash showed a slow heartbeat of numbers. Fuel. Good. Temp steady. Cruise set. A paper map lay folded beside the seat because she liked knowing the shape of the land, not only the path through it. The interstate ran a clean ribbon east to west, the mile markers counting down like steps to a door. Her CB sat mostly quiet. Channel 19 muttered about weather 2 states over and someone's late dispatch. She clicked over a few times to make sure the world was still out there. At 2:58 inches the morning. She settled on a low channel she didn't usually touch, 13 more out of idle curiosity than anything else. The speaker breathed and then rested. The reefer thrummed like a cat happy to be left alone. A voice came through, small and clear, the kind that sits in the back seat and reads signs without being asked. 74, it said. The number hung in the cab like a polite knock. Inez glanced at the shoulder. Mile marker 74 slid by on her right. White post brushed by light. The voice came again. 73. Not excited. Not bored, just the word, then nothing. She smiled despite herself. Somewhere ahead or behind, a family must be keeping a child awake by giving them something to do. She pictured a minivan heavy with blankets and snacks, parents swapping the wheel between songs. The voice would read until sleep sealed it. 72. The voice came in just a little before the next marker stood and went. Half a breath ahead. She switched back to 19, then back to 13. The other channels weren't carrying anything important. The little voice landed only on 13, each number the same shape. 71. She told herself it was coincidence that the timing matched so closely that someone ahead in the dark mapped the same road. She told herself that even though she had always been careful about counting exits, miles, the way a train of fence posts can become a metronome for the mind. The reefer's hum sounded a touch louder. Or maybe she was listening harder. 70, the voice said. And then, like a change in script, watch the wind. She felt it then. Not a gust. A lean. The kind of sidelong pressure that didn't come from disagreement in the truck so much as a suggestion from the air. Her hands settled without tightening. She eased a hair off the cruise and let the rig sit lower in the lane, a way she'd learned to make a loaded trailer feel like a nail hammered just a bit further into the wood. At 70, a stretch of open on her right widened into a dry lake bed that could throw winds unpredictable as ideas. The trailer's valves whispered as the unit ticked, a tiny pulse in calm. She breathed. The push came and passed, more like a coat being tried on than a shove. The little voice didn't speak again. She rode the quiet. 69, it said after a while. Then, with the exact tone of a teacher reminding a room about a simple truth, move left. Inez looked ahead into her high beams and saw it only when the light took the angle right. The dark rectangle of a mattress, slumped partially on the shoulder but tilted enough into her lane to catch and swing under if she clipped it. She flicked the blinker and checked her mirror. Empty. She moved over, smooth as saying please. The mattress went by in a neat blank of shadow. She found the right line again and watched her mirror all the same, because beds dragged onto roads were never alone. They were always parts of lives that had other pieces. She toggled the mic and spoke onto 13, half to the kid's family that must be out there, half to the air itself. Appreciate it, she said. Good eyes. A man's laugh answered, not unkind. You heard it too? The voice belonged to someone probably her age. Maybe older voice like tires on new asphalt, easy and sure. She scanned the road and saw no headlights that matched where another semi would be if someone nearby had keyed up at the same time. The dark made it difficult to place anyone by sound alone. I'm at 68, she said. Thought it was a little backseat helper. I'm at 71, he said. Been listening since 80. Thought I had a toy battery dying in the dash. The child's voice said 68, and then fell quiet again. Inez listened harder and heard something under the numbers. Not words. The shape of a breath warming before speaking, as if the person had walked a bit too far and was catching up. The reefer ticked. When the road dipped into a small cut through a low rise, she lost the wind and gained stillness layered on stillness. The voice came the way a whisper comes when someone leans into your ear to say something meant only for you. Look up, it said. She did, because you answer certain tones with compliance born before thought. The sky, still mostly black, made way for a scrape of falling light, a small meteor crossing at a lazy angle, white as a match flared and blown out. She let it pass, and felt the second that broke between its start and end. She knew the look of that moment. She had counted such moments all her life, not just in the sky, at the crest of a hill, at the exact point where a turn becomes straight again, at the breath just before a call connects. 65, said the voice. Watch your right stripe. She watched it. The stripe went true, but a piece of truck tire, peeled and stiff as a shed skin, lay curled like a comma kissing the edge. Her passenger side steer would have bitten it if not for the small correction she'd already begun. She took the line she would have taken anyway, and let the warning fold into her own habit until she couldn't tell which part belonged to whom. The man on 13 said, "Feels like a mile up," Inez said, "or a mile away." For 10 miles the voice counted, and the highway delivered small tests. A van merging without confidence. A coyote gray as a stone darting and then thinking better of it. The faint suggestion of fog that didn't form. the way an idea sometimes walks to a door and decides to stay on the step. And then, at 57, the voice changed. Not the voice itself. The pitch and tone remained, but the cadence altered, the way a song moves to a bridge. "Stop," it said. "Stop at 57, please." No cars in her mirror, no reason she could see. The shoulder at that stretch was wide and clean, gravel bright as wheat under her low beams. She eased over. Blinkers clicked like a metronome set for patience. She rolled to a stop and felt the trailer's weight settle into the earth. Across the median, a pair of lights crested, then dipped, then appeared again in a way that said the driver had not yet decided which lane made the most sense. She waited because the tone had said please. If the voice had said anything else, she might not have listened in time. The deer came as a group, like a thought that gathers more ideas as it goes. 5, then 7, then a dozen, then enough that the count no longer helped. They stepped onto the road and stood there, their decisions not any of hers. The other driver, blessed or cursed by luck, had slowed. Their headlights feathered the animals' bodies into silhouettes, soft and precise, not afraid, not hurried. The deer crossed, and the last took a moment to stand in the warmth of the red light that made a color with the fur along its spine. The voice said, "You can go now," like a teacher dismissing Rose by neat order. Inez let the truck climb back to speed, but not all at once. She had avoided worse in her life not by halting, but by allowing momentum to build only when the ground asked for it. "Thank you," she said onto 13. She wasn't certain whether she meant the child or the driver or the space between them, where the sound seemed to be made. "You two copying numbers?" came a third voice, bright and curious. A woman this time, farther off by the way her words traveled thin and came back open at the edges. "Thought my coffee was speaking to me," Inez told her the mile. The three of them rode the radio that way for a while, strangers who felt less like that because of the way roads make a sort of family out of anyone who shares a thing you cannot hold. The voice continued at its own pace. It said numbers and occasionally something small. "Left lane. Take it easy. Don't look at the lights on the hill too long. They're not for you." At 52, the highway rose to meet a stretch of older alignment, a shadow beside the present road where it had once run before crews straightened it. The remains of an old rest area, fenced off, sat back from the shoulder, 2 picnic tables with their paint chewed by weather, a brick box that had once been a restroom, windows boarded, roof peeled a little at the corner like a page the wind would flip if it could, an old payphone booth tilted in a way that meant people had kept leaning on it even when it stopped working. The booth's dark stuttered. Its light, long dead in daylight eyes, made a brief, sickle-bright flicker. Inez checked the clock. The time didn't need to be checked. It was the time when things like that happen. She pulled onto the ramp that wasn't for anyone anymore, careful of the fence, careful of the peace that lived at such places. The others on 13 asked what she was doing, and then didn't ask again because some choices are private even when shared aloud. She idled near the booth and cut her engine so the night could be heard in its own voice. The lights along the interstate moved like a steady constellation. The booth stood. The payphone inside wore a handset the color of old bones. It rang, a sound surprising and plain, like a bell in a church on a weekday. Inez got down. Gravel took her steps and held them. She opened the booth door. Inside, the air smelled like dust and the citric tang of some cleaner last sprayed. Years ago. The phone rang again. She lifted the receiver. It felt heavier than it looked. "Hello," she said, "because names have power, and some words keep rooms safe." The child's voice came through. Close now, the radio gone between. "Left at 49, it said. Get ready at 47. Dust. All at once. The night air outside changed temperature not by degrees but by intention. The smell of the world flattened, losing its layers until it was just dry and electrical, like a sheet pulled tight. Inez remembered the way the ground could rise and the air could drop when a dust front approached, how everything got dressed in the same color, a democracy nobody voted for. The voice on the phone continued in that same unruffled cadence. "Your dad used to say keep your promises small and your mirrors big. He's right." Inez was glad she had already leaned her shoulder against the booth. The words reached in and touched a place she kept separate from roads and schedules and invoices. When she was a child in the passenger seat of a box truck, her father had said those exact words while tucking a napkin into a cup holder. She turned her head because memory, when it arrives like that, makes you feel watched even when you are not. In the reflection of the booth's glass, she saw only herself and the suggestion of her truck, patient and tall behind her. "Who are you?" she asked. Not angry, not afraid, only curious in the way one is when a person knows your groceries without having seen your cart. The line made a sound like wind toys, chimes without actual chimes. Then the voice said, "Left at 49. Again." As if the answer was in the repetition. She hung up gently, set the receiver back with a care she would have used for a sleeping child's head, and climbed in. The man on 13 said, "Dust?" The woman said, "That sky looks tired." "Left at 49, Inez said, echoing to make the instruction stick. She set herself a little closer to the dividing line and slowed to a pace that kept the trailer loyal. She checked her mirrors. The glass showed what glass shows, light, steady, and certain. She turned on her hazards, not because anything had gone wrong, but because she wanted anyone behind to inherit caution she had already paid for. At mile 48, the horizon changed from horizon to wall in the space of a breath. A low front of dust unrolled, steady as a hand laying linen across a table. The first touch was fine, like powder, a soft pattering on the windshield that wasn't rain but wanted to be. The next was thicker. The truck moved into it, and the world turned to close whisper. Inez had been through whiteouts and all manner of rain. Dust was its own chapter. It took light and made it fair, then unfair. It tried to make decisions for you. She could see the hood, a small part of the stripe, the faintest suggestion of reflector posts when they chose to shine. The reefer's hum made a holy sound now, the kind of steady that reminds you what within your reach stays faithful. "Left," said the child's voice on 13, so soft she almost thought it came from her own mouth. "Keep the left stripe. Don't chase the middle. Promises small." She kept the left stripe. You can't make too many choices when the world is only as wide as your hood. She kept her promises tiny. Stay straight. Breathe. Don't break too much. Let the truck be what it was built to be. The man and the woman on 13 narrated without meaning to, the way people do when sharing trouble. "I'm down to 30. Same. See a shadow of an overpass up ahead? At 47, the darkness above changed to a shape, and then the shape became the honest underside of a bridge. They nestled under it like birds along a beam. 3 trucks, they could see that now, and a sedan that chose wisely to follow their rule. Inez felt her heartbeat in her hands, where she held the wheel but not fast. Just present, like a helpful friend who doesn't leave. They waited. Dust stroked the world, and then decided to move on. It didn't clear all at once. It let the shape of the median appear first, then the far lane, then the sky in slivers, then the idea of edges. The child counted this time not miles but seconds, softly into 13. 1, 2, 3, up to 10, then a pause that held a kind of kindness. "Okay," it said. "Okay." They pulled out in order. The sedan went last, wise again. At 45, the wall behind them looked like weather anywhere else, dramatic at a distance. Up close, it had been patient and almost kind, if a person can use that word for something that doesn't mean them harm but doesn't care about their schedule. Inez didn't look back long. She had learned lowercase gratitude on the road thanks that don't need bigger gestures than a light touch on a wheel and a nod to the empty air. The voice read out 44, then 43, then stopped for a while. When it spoke again, it was different, not the child. A recorded tone, perhaps. The sort of test or emergency ping that used to play on radios at the top of the hour. 3 beeps, then quiet. The man asked, "You still with us?" "Still," said the woman. "I'm here," Inez said. Flowers holding steady. She didn't say she had a smell in her nose that wasn't flowers. It was a little like the inside of an old book, and like citrus. Together, the memory of cleaner in the phone booth. The miles rolled. The child's voice returned now and then like a voice from a room where the door stays a little ajar. It said only what it needed to, and sometimes nothing for long stretches. When dawn finally admitted itself, pink and gold at first, and then full, the voice fell away completely, as if light made it unnecessary. They reached a city's edge at last, the kind where warehouses line up neat and forklifts are the first creatures to wake. Inez took the exit for a yard she knew. The truck felt lighter, by exactly the weight of tension shed properly. She parked, did her checks, signed paperwork with a pen that had a strange smell of peppermint, and watched a crew move crates of roses and lilies like a choreography that had been practiced once and then done well forever. When she came back to the cab, a small thing lay on her dash she did not remember leaving there. A paper triangle folded from the wrapper of a piece of gum, the way her father used to make little boats at diners when she was small. She hadn't bought gum in months. She picked it up and felt the crease in the paper under her thumb, the exact angle of the fold he had favored, not because there was only one way to fold, but because habits learn us as much as we learn them. On 13, for a heartbeat, a sound hissed and shaped itself into something almost like a laugh. Then the channel went back to the world's ordinary chatter, someone selling a used CB set, someone else asking about the cheapest diesel between two towns. Inez put the paper in the small box where she kept flattened coins and odd receipts with dates that had once meant something. She started the engine. The reefer answered in its faithful voice. She checked her mirrors, made them big in her mind, and rolled toward her next miles. Later that week, at a counter where coffee is always hot and sometimes good, a driver asked if anyone had ever heard a kid counting mile markers at night. 2 heads lifted, a third too slowly to be coincidence. No one told a punchline. No one made it grand. One by one, they offered a small detail, the number at which the voice had said stop, the way a mattress can sit like a waiting word, the feel in the air before dust comes on. They nodded like people who have discovered a new place to be careful of, and made a map of it without needing ink. That evening, the sky held a clean blue that made promises it could keep. Inez set her wheel at a comfortable angle, and let the road take her at the rate that matched its posture. The flowers she carried this time were sunflowers, big faces turned to whatever light travels with us. She tuned to 13 out of habit. Silence. Good. She didn't need help to count. Still, when mile marker 200 approached and then slipped behind, she found herself murmuring the numbers under her breath, a kind of prayer that wasn't to anything but the idea of getting where you say you're going. On a stretch where the interstate ran straight as a thought, she flipped the paper boat over in her palm and noticed a faint stamp on the inside of the wrapper, a brand of gum she hadn't seen since she was a kid, all bright colors and a cartoon bear. The corner of her mouth quirked. Not fear, not even surprise, just recognition, the way you recognize a street in a town you haven't visited in years. As the sun dropped, turning the world copper and kind, she set the truck to do what it does best and let the miles open. If the little voice ever wanted to ride along again, there was room for it, as there is room for wind and radio and the sound of your own thoughts keeping company in the dark. And if it didn't, all right. She had a left stripe and a right stripe, numbers that counted down steady, and a promise small enough to carry. Mirrors big, hands light, listen for what listens for you. Story number 4. Rain had varnished the 2-lane into something that looked more like a ribbon than a road, edges soft, centerline bright as a scratch in lacquer. Rowan kept the rig at a pace that respected the night and the weather, fingers easy, shoulders level, eyes doing their slow sweep from mirrors to gauges to blacktop ahead. The interstate had thrown up a surprise bridge out, detour, and scooted everyone down an exit into smaller towns that slept with front porches and low eaves. His load was show gear, truss, and cases, and delicate lamps packed as if they were glass hearts. The straps sang a tight little chord over each bump. He liked the sound. It told him everything was still with him. The wipers moved in a choreography they had invented with the rain an hour back. Up, tap, down, pause. He let them lead. The detour signs were fresh, their flares a humble orange compared with the cooler light of his beams. He took them as they came, an arrow here, an arrow there. The particular inked confidence of temporary direction. His phone, wedged in its cradle, had opinions about what was faster that he ignored. Somewhere between towns, he tuned the dash radio to a station that seemed mostly static, with a low voice soldered to it, an overnight swap meet show where a man described garden tools from the 1,970 seconds like sacred relics. It was steadying, in its way. He didn't need company exactly, but he didn't mind the sound of someone making careful lists. The ridge ahead wore a red light on a stalk. A tower, one of those utilitarian spines that hold up the air's thirst for signals. The light should have blinked steady, one pulse, one pause in the slow heartbeat planes like to see when they wander this low. It did not. It blinked 3 times tight, then sat a little, then once longer, then paused long enough to make a person wonder if it was through for the night. Rowan noticed without deciding to notice. He had a thing for patterns. Most drivers did, though not all would name it. He eased around a bend marked with a yellow 35 that mostly existed for people who came out here twice a year. He kept it at 40 and felt the trailer follow like a polite dog. The road dove under a rail line, then rose to meet a stone underpass, the kind built when everything taller was a rare sight. The old stones wore moss, and the kind of water lines you only see if you know what the world does when it's tired of staying put. On the right side of the opening, a metal plate gave the clearance in hand-lettered numbers that had been painted over and over by different hands. 13-6 on a night that would let a tall truck kiss trouble if the road had heaved even an inch. Rowan's trailer topped out at 13-4 by the book. Add rain, swollen asphalt, or a little pride in the tires, and it felt too close for a night he wanted to be a clean line from point A to B. He dropped a shoulder to glance at the paper atlas on the seat. Yes. He still kept one clearance marked. Notation in the margin from a driver long before him that simply said, "Okay, dry. Be kind if wet." He eased off the throttle anyway. A little kindness costs less than a new roof. The tower blinked again, a red seam in the corner of his eye. 3 short, 3 short, 1 long. He didn't know Morse by study, but he knew what SOS looked like from movies and an uncle who had taught him to tap a table when they waited too long for food. This wasn't that, not exactly. Another sequence followed. ... Pause. ... Pause. ... He said the alphabet quietly in his head the way a person finds a file. A is ... B is ... He shook his head and smiled at himself. This was not the night to have his brain pull parlor tricks. On his left, there was nowhere to go but meadow and the shadow of oak. On his right, the shoulder narrowed and leaned into a ditch, where water spoke in a voice that had not learned inside voices. The underpass waited. He'd taken tighter squeezes. He would take this one. Then the radio, not the AM with the garden tools, but the CB he kept on 19 low out of respect, lifted and lowered like a cautious hand. "Big truck coming east," a voice said, unhurried in a way that cut through. "You'll want to hold." The voice didn't sound like a cop or a road worker or a kid poking fun. It sounded like a neighbor calling to you from a porch when your dog got out. Rowan had 2 habits that had saved him more times than any one piece of gear. He listened to hunches as if they were directions printed on paper, and he gave the world 10 seconds more than it asked for. He touched the brake with the delicacy of someone feeling for steps in a dark room, and brought the truck to a stop before the underpass. Hazard lights clicked, soft and certain. The rain kept up its small percussion on the cab roof. The tower blinked again. D, A, no, W, then A, then I. He nearly laughed, teeth barely showing. Wait. He might be making a story out of random blinks. He might be putting order on coincidence. That was fine. He could let coincidence rule the night for 1 minute. Headlights bloomed in his mirrors and slid to a stop in his left glass. A pickup, lifted too high and too bright on the eyes, nosed up close on the shoulder. The driver leaned out his window and said something that didn't carry, his arm doing the universal half circle of impatient men everywhere. Rowan lifted his palm and rolled his wrist in the universal, "Give me a minute." The pickup man dropped his hand in an arc of surrender, a gesture with more heat than hate, and ducked around. He tucked himself tight to the center line, waited for a breathless gap that wasn't really a gap, and committed. The truck fit. The pickup breathed out on the far side in a little fishtail, corrected, and went on with his life. Rowan had started to ask himself if he was being too cautious when the water found its mind to rise. It came not with the theatricality of a movie wave, but with the stubborn insistence of a fill bucket left under a faucet you thought you'd turned off. In a breath and a half, the low spot beneath the underpass filled the hubcap. Rowan watched the taillights of the pickup lift and bob. The driver punched his speed and rode out on the other side. Luck and the bulletproof design of cheap trucks kept him from stalling in the tank. A cardboard box, a clump of leaves, a small plastic action figure tumbled in the swirl that spun in the center. The descent of the water did not take long enough for the drain to find itself again. Enough to leave a thin line dark against old stone, new above old. He rolled, slow and clean, the weight steady, the clearance blessed. The wipers made their careful promise and kept it. On the other side, the road took a shy bend and opened onto a work zone, one of those small night crews that appear like camps in legends here. Real, but somehow set apart. Cones lined a long corridor, reflective bands catching his beams and giving them back. An arrow board at the far end sent left, right, in a hypnotic dance. A person stood mid-lane in a yellow slicker, hood up, face in shadow, holding a paddle that read slow on his approach and would, if turned, say stop. The figure's free hand lifted, palm toward him, the exact flat shape of certainty. Rowan rolled to a halt under the soft authority of the sign. He scanned. No other vehicles queued. No rumble of a pilot car idling somewhere with "Follow Me" in tidy letters. No scattered crew taking a quick breath under the eaves of a piece of equipment, clutching coffee like talismans. Rain softened the edges of everything, as if the night wanted to smudge the lines so nobody would get in trouble for crossing them. The person's paddle did not drip. That stuck in Rowan's mind because the rain didn't miss anything else. The tower on the ridge winked through the gap between trees like an old friend checking whether you remembered a game. 3 short. 1 long. 1 short. He found himself speaking quietly in his empty cab. Right. The tower said right, or he wanted it to. He could concede that. He moved his eyes to take in the far edge of the zone. Beyond the arrow board, past a couple of cones splayed out like fallen finches, a ribbon of wet gravel curved around the work. Not a lane. A makeshift bypass, tamped and convincing the way a temporary fix tries on responsibility and wears it fine. He thumbed his mic. "Crew, you got a pilot?" He asked on 19 because 19 is where everyone is when they need something now. Silence for a heartbeat. Rain. The tower blinked. Then a voice that belonged to a woman with 3 shifts experience and endless practice said, "Hold 1, eastbound." Pilots coming from the far end. The slicker figure in the road lifted the paddle and turned it neatly. Stop faced him now. The movement was crisp and correct. It was also a little too slow, like someone imitating a movement they had seen once, not 10,000 times. He waited anyway. Waiting costs less than guessing wrong. Headlights appeared low and steady beyond, the kind of lights that belong on a car that isn't in a hurry. They rounded the bend of the bypass and presented themselves with the modesty of people who do their work without asking for applause. "Follow me," the back glass requested in tidy block letters. The driver threw a hand up with the precise acknowledgement that all road workers use half wave, half blessing. The slicker figure did not return it. The pilot car lined up in front of Rowan and flashed a little wink of hazard. The woman's voice on 19 returned, this time closer. "All right, big truck, crawl it around. Mind the edge where the gravel meets the old shoulder. We tamped it, but we don't need you finding the creek for us." Rowan eased into the bypass, tires making their small hymn over new stone. The work site revealed itself in pieces as he crept. Rebar stuck up like the ribs of something replacing something else. A hole in the road breathed with a sound that could have been water or wind trained to the narrow. A backhoe sat in a posture that suggested sleep, its bucket tipped like a chin and palm. A man in a hard hat held a radio as if it were a teacup. He nodded at Rowan's passing and touched the brim of his hat in a gesture from earlier in the century. Rowan nodded back. He had been raised to receive greetings as if they were gifts. As he rolled past the slicker figure, he let his eyes flick. No drip off the paddle. No drip off the slicker's hem. Rain fell through the person and found the ground. He put his eyes back on the pilot car, on the gravel that tried to be road, on the curve of light ahead. The tower on the ridge went quiet. The bypass returned him to the original lane with the tidiness of someone tucking a corner on a bed. On the far side, as they waited to let a westbound dump truck take its turn, the pilot car driver spoke again, now on the CB with the laugh of someone who had been awake a long time and found it still worth their trouble. "You get a hold short back there?" she asked. "My flagger's grabbing a coffee. Shouldn't have been nobody standing in your way." Rowan paused. "Someone was," he said, "because polite does not equal inaccurate." Yellow slicker, paddle. Stopped me clean. She made a thoughtful sound that had no fear in it. Just a ripple of a story being adjusted. Huh. Maybe one of the county guys walked up. Roads full of cousins when it floods. We're spread thin at night. Thanks for waiting. Some folks just nose in and pickle themselves. A dump truck crept by on the bypass. Wet gravel talking like sugar under its tires. The pilot car flicked her hazards once and took the lead again, delivering Rowan to a place where cones thinned and then surrendered to open road. She peeled off onto a shoulder wide enough to allow that, waved him forward with a certainty that suggested she would be there tomorrow too, and gave him one more gift of CB. Watch the old underpass after the creek, she said. She swells fast. Old man used to run a siren and a light up on the ridge. Little Hill saved more than a few impatient folks. They pulled the siren in. What? 10? The light does whatever it wants now. Maybe it's on our side. Rowan said thank you and meant it. The rain eased to a mist that turned his beams into the softest of tunnels. He climbed back toward the main highway, detour signs doing their last bit of kindness by becoming fewer and then resisting the urge to declare victory. His AM radio admitted a song and then changed its mind. The CB whispered with two drivers arguing about which brand of wiper blade had a little more spine. The ridge light blinked once more where he could see it over his left shoulder. Single flash. A pause long enough for it to mean nothing, or something. He kept going. The night loosened slowly, like fingers on a jar lid. The bridge back onto the interstate stood with new concrete over old water. He merged up and into the bright world of 3 lanes and reflective paint that flicked by like thoughts. The rain wandered off to test fences in other counties. His speed grew into the number painted on the sign. The straps behind him held. He said a quiet word to the wheel, the way some people say a quiet word to the sky. In the morning he delivered to an arena where the crew joked in half sentences and moved like a dance they learned as children. Steel rolled off steel. A man with tape around his wrist the way other men wear watches asked if Rowan wanted coffee and accepted no for an answer with grace. On the way back west, the detour had not yet been lifted. He took the same roads by daylight and found them less mysterious, as daylight wants. The underpass wore a brown line new as a wrinkle. Someone had tucked a little bouquet above a stone ledge daisies wrapped in a paper towel that had gone half gray with wet. He didn't dwell. He saw and filed it in the cabinet where he kept true sights. The work zone by day revealed itself as perfectly ordinary. Crew trucks parked nose to tail, in a way that said they liked each other okay. A woman in a bright vest whose coffee was half gone, waving a paddle in precise useful arcs. The pilot car with a new scrape on 1/4 panel, making a joke out of it before anyone else could. No slicker figure stood in the rainless lane. The bypass showed the lines of yesterday's crossings, tracks layered and neat. On a light pole near the approach to the zone, he saw something he had not seen last night. A small piece of laminated paper zip, tied like a charm, lettered in patient hand with a Sharpie. If light blinks odd, wait. Creek plays tricks. Underneath, a smiley face, as if to soften the order. He smiled back at it and kept his pace gentled. He drew even with the ridge in clear noon. The tower's red cap blinked, measured and compliant, as if scolded by daylight into doing only what it should. He knew better than to think daylight changed anything important. It just dressed it different. He flicked his hazards twice, 3 times, then paused, then flicked them once. Not because he wanted to send a message, because he had one hand available, and it felt like good manners. He thought of the old man on the ridge with a hand on a switch, and a mind tuned to the way water and rocks speak. That night, at a counter where the waitress wore bee earrings and called everyone Han without being small about it, he left a bill under his coffee and turned his change over in his palm. 1/4 had a state on it with a tower drawn small, a little red dot ghosting in the mind, right where the tower light would be. He set the coin on edge and watched it spin gently under the fluorescent kindness of the diner. It wobbled and found stillness. He pocketed it without assigning meaning, beyond the small satisfaction of something behaving itself for a moment. Weeks passed, roads unspooled. He found himself on a different run, farther north, where pines make lines and snow remains in ditches, even when it has no business being there. A tower on another ridge blinked true, then odd, then true again, as if remembering its job, and then remembering something else. He paused a touch longer, at a blind turn, than he would have otherwise. A logging truck came through wide, airy with the confidence of a veteran. Neither of them had to do anything heroic. That felt like the point. He did not tell many people about the slicker figure or the blinking letters he thought he'd read. He told none about the way the word wait had felt in his chest like a hand placed flat, not to push him back but to remind him to listen. You can tell a lot of things on the road, and some of them belong to anyone. Some belong to the person who was there when the night decided to give them a nudge. Once, in a fuel island line that moved like a polite parade, a driver leaned out his window and said, "You come through Clover Ridge last month? Saw your trailer in my mirror." Rowan nodded because whether or not his trailer had been there, some part of his road had passed through someone else's. The man tapped his dome light on and off twice, then once, and grinned. "Old Harlan says thanks for not making a mess," he said. And then he rolled up and drove on, leaving the words behind like a receipt nobody wanted to throw away. On a summer night that smelled like weeds after rain, he crossed the same county on a different contract. The underpass sat dry. The stones kept their counsel. The tower blinked steady as a metronome in a piano teacher's living room. He waited at a sign not because it told him to, but because pausing had become part of his forward motion. A frog spoke from the ditch in a voice that made it sound like the only frog there, though everyone knows there are always more. He put the truck in gear and moved. He had somewhere to be and plenty of time to take the right shape to get there. And if a light somewhere chose to speak to him again in a language he only half remembered, he would answer. He would hazard twice and once. He would listen for what listens back. Story number 5. The highway threaded through orchard country, a low valley where the air in late summer held a sweetness that clung to the back of the throat, apples not yet picked, pears turning their minds toward it. Sana drove with the windows kissed shut against the dust, the vent set to a quiet breath. Her trailer was full of boxes meant for classrooms, stacks of blank composition books with their speckled covers, glue sticks that smelled faintly like childhood, crayons asleep in their paper beds. The load weighed less than some she'd hauled. The truck felt nimble, steady as a skater on smooth ice. On the passenger seat sat an atlas older than her career, its cover softened by hands that had wiped rain from it 100 times. She kept it not because the phone or the dash couldn't guide her. They could, but because the book had a way of reminding her how roads fit into land. In the back, on the flyleaf, a name had been written in pencil, and then erased until only a shadow of graphite remained. She had picked it up at a yard sale in a town where the man at the table said with a shrug, $5 for wisdom, and she had laughed and given him a 10. She made a habit of leaving her own small notes in the margins, with a mechanical pencil that lived clipped to the cover. A nearby diner with grapefruit halves she liked. A bridge that always felt narrower than it measured. A gas station whose air hose worked even when the card reader didn't. The notes were tidy, sensible, and hers. Lately, though, she had found other marks faint and unfamiliar, like someone had pressed words into the paper without fully writing them. At first, she told herself they were leftovers from the previous owner. The dates didn't always fit. The advice did, which is not the same as comfort. Tonight, she eased through the last light of a small town, where a mural of a train ran the length of a feed store. The intercom at the only all-night fuel stop was turned off. The clerk waved instead, mouth forming a hello that fogged the glass. Beyond that, darkness took the edges of things gently and blew on them until they softened. The road rose. The first foothills showed teeth. Sana checked her mirrors and set her shoulders where they like to sit for climbs. The atlas lay open to a page where a river, braided on the map, braided again in real life somewhere out there. At mile marker 212, the atlas made a sound. Not a noise exactly, but a small thup, as if the paper had changed its mind about how it wanted to lie. She glanced over. The right-hand page had turned back a fraction, creating a triangle of shadow and text. In the margin, near a faint printed dot labeled Mason's Bend, a new line appeared in the softest, neatest pencil she'd seen in a long time. It was so thin the letters looked like grooves more than graphite. She blinked, looked at the road again, then back. The words were still there. If fog settles low, take turnout before bend. Count 30. Go. Her lips parted on a breath that didn't become words. She had stopped arguing with the atlas after the third time. A notation she hadn't written had saved her from a delay. Tonight, the air ahead looked clear. Fog doesn't live by our rules, though, not in orchard country. It pours off irrigation and river, like a thought that prefers the ground. She did not change lanes. She did not tap brakes hard. She glanced, learned where the suggested turnout sat by the shape of the printed contour lines, and decided that if a minute wanted to be spent, she could afford it. The road curved, gentle until it wasn't. A wooden sign, peeled by weather, announced Mason's Bend as though a person other than the bend had decided to name it. Santa signaled, slid into a gravel pocket tucked neatly before the curve, and rolled to a stop. The world seemed to hold its breath with her. She counted quietly, not laboring over the numbers, letting them arrive one after another like cars in a distant procession. At 19, fog lifted from the bend as if someone had pulled a white blanket off the road and forgot the corners. It filled the outside lane and then, with a small sigh, the inside. Headlights came through it slow, a pickup truck with a mattress tied down by someone's past experience. The driver's hand lifted to her in the quick salute of a person who knows they might have tested the limits of their luck. She smiled without it reaching her mouth, and pressed her palm to the wheel. At 30, she eased out. Her hood cut into the fog and made a neat hole for her body to pass through, and then the night took back its texture. The atlas's penciled words had made a point. She let the wheel rest easy in her hands, and tried not to think about how a book could make choices. As the hills gathered into something that wanted to be called mountains, the road set itself to work. The moon, thin as an idea, showed where the ridges overlapped. Sana's radio gave weather east of here, and the Sunday scores from a summer league where hometown pride mattered more than attendance. Someone on 19 asked whether the state line scale would be awake at this hour. A woman answered. No one asked her to be, but she was, and conversation drifted back to its own weight. She glanced at the atlas again and saw another line, lower down this time. Near a creek, her phone map called something it had no right to dry, but that tonight told a different truth in the dark. The east pump clicks early, said the pencil beside a dot labeled Wickers. Use west. Thank you. The words looked like her own, but they were not. The thank you made her throat feel warm, as if she'd taken a sip of tea without realizing it. She shook her head at herself and drove. It didn't make sense, but plenty didn't. And so what? Her fuel gouge had room in it. Still, the sight of Wickers, with its handful of pumps under a canopy whose lights worked better than most, felt like someone had set up a chair for her and told her to sit a minute. She pulled in. The east pump wore a red plastic bag cinched at the neck, like a scarf against weather and time. The west pump waited. She smiled once. Small. The humor was all her own. The quiet that followed felt shared. She topped off. The receipt printer coughed gently and dispensed a thin slip she folded and slid behind the visor. A man in a baseball cap walked a dog whose ears bounced with the seriousness of its job. The dog looked at her and then at a spot at her shoulder, wagged once, and gave itself to the night. Back on the highway, the climb turned to a slow descent. Sana set her speed steady. The faintest taste of metal reached her tongue, the way air can feel when lightning has thought of something to do very far off. She knew this stretch. Morning frost could happen in deep shade even when the valley floor thought about heat. The atlas had a faint crease down a page that showed 3 switchbacks stacked like little shelves. She had put a note there once about a turnout good for letting a nervous motorhome pass. Now, even lighter pencil traced beneath her own. If the power lines hum here, give the center line more of you. She glanced up. The lines did hum, a barely there singing that learned its tune from time. She let her cab lean over a hair toward paint, and away from shoulder where a rockfall would like to pretend it had not been planned. When she passed the 3rd switchback, a handful of pebbles slid from the slope and pattered onto the fog line like someone unstuck a handful of buttons. She nodded to the air in front of her and rolled. Not all the notes were warnings. Near a small town called Eerie that existed mostly as a smell of pears and a single streetlight arguing with moths, the atlas margin offered. Left if you crave good coffee that doesn't mind being called coffee no chalk, no dance. She didn't crave coffee. She turned in anyway. The counter was clean, the stools polite, and the chalkboard admitted up front that what they poured was dark and honest. The man behind the counter put a slice of cinnamon toast on a plate and slid it across with a simple, "On the house," as though someone had told him she'd be by. She ate it with the gratitude a person saves for gestures that don't require a story. She left cash under the edge of the register drawer, because that's how these things go. Back in motion, the atlas waited without any sign of opinion. Sana felt her usual resistance to letting superstition put its hooks into her. Then let the resistance go. Survival in the dark had made more room for courtesy than for doctrine. If a line of pencil wanted her to count or slow or stop, she knew how to do all three. She drove into a stretch of night that had forgotten stars, and the black ran soft and complete around her beams. The pass came up the way passes do nothing, and then, all at once, the suggestion that land did odd things before people reasoned with it. Signs warned of a grade and urged low gear and exclamation points woven into pictograms. She downshifted to let the engine do its honest work. A long line of reflectors marched up the right, a metronome for night eyes. The atlas lay open to her left, and without looking she could feel its weight. She didn't need to see the next part to know something would be there. She could feel an alert bloom in the edges of her mind where attention hangs out. She looked, quick and controlled as a flick of the eyes to a mirror. At the center of the left page, along a white road that had no yellow on the atlas to announce it was Maine, new letters rested. If the radio sings two at once, do not take Wolf Cutoff. Stay with the big road. Give it your patience. It never sings two at once, she said to the wheel, because giving words somewhere to go helps keep them from crowding the throat. The radio listened a moment, and then, like it wanted to make it easy on her, gave her a song she didn't know braided with one she did. 2 stations took turns failing and succeeding. The cutoff sign appeared, green and kind, promising a shortcut over Wolf Ridge that looked simple on paper. A smaller sign beneath wore the gray of weather and time. Chain required during conditions. A line of black where chains had bit into asphalt years back gave a faint warning of how steep could argue with traction. She stayed with the big road, not because the atlas told her so, because the atlas was a reason to admit she already wanted to. Half a mile beyond the cutoff, red brake lights shone around a long bend, not stopping, but slowing enough to say something had happened. Work lights flared where shoulder met lane. A tow crew tended a pickup nose down in a ditch. Front wheel cocked at an angle it had not chosen for itself. No airbags hung, no sirens called, and the driver sat on the guardrail with his elbows on his knees and his eyes clear and shocked. The way people look when something small has become large and then the world decided to be kind. A woman in a reflective vest held a thermos for him. The vest flashed in Sana's light, and she turned her attention back to her job. The radio picked one song and kept it. The cutoff kept its counsel. When the grade settled, she found a turnout the size of a spare thought and pulled in. She set the brake, let the engine settle, rolled her shoulders, drank water with the intent of someone who planned on keeping bodies operating, and leaned across to the atlas. The pencil lay where she left it. She did a thing she hadn't done yet, she answered. On the thin line that marked the turnout, she wrote small. Counted at the bend. Fog came up like it had manners. Stayed for 30. Thank you. She didn't press hard. She didn't write her name. She didn't feel foolish. She closed the book and put her hand on the cover for a second. The cardboard warmed under her palm exactly as much as a thing warms under a hand, and not more. Small towns gave way to smaller. The highway reawakened into divided lanes, and then yielded that again to 2. At a crossroads where a church sat neat under a bell tower, and a grocery's handwritten sign out front said peaches 99 cents and sorry sold out. The phone on her dash lost its bars with a little sigh of surrender. The atlas smiled up at her without actually moving any paper around. She watched the road. She watched the fields. She watched the night. Trucking is a lot of watching, and deciding you're watching is accurate. In the broad of the valley, where the river widened into many choices for water and fewer for people, a low-shouldered bridge waited. It looked like nothing. It acted like something. It crossed a section where mist drank the world from the ground up, and where the road's edges had been painted so many times, they glowed bright even under a sky that had decided to stop helping. She slowed. The atlas's margin had a line written at some old date, half gone under her thumb. If the lamp on the left burns steady, the far side has company. If it flickers, it's yours. She glanced at the bridge lights. The left burned steady, the kind of glow that wants to be called faithful. The right flickered once like an exhausted eye, and then settled. The far left lane's reflector posts took on a glow, subtle, like distant headlights caught in fog. She waited. She put on hazards not to warn but to speak. A tractor trailer appeared at the far end out of nothing and made its modest way across. The driver's face was invisible, but a hand lifted, a gesture larger than it needed to be so she could see, and she lifted her own in answer. They traded safety. She made her crossing after the bridge let go of him. When she rolled off the far bank, the fog peeled away and sat on the water again, entirely uninterested in the affairs of people. The road widened. A set of scales sat dark and tired. She didn't slow because the lights were off. She slowed because you don't come past a place where people measure and decide to act as though you're above it. The atlas page made no new lines. Not every mile asks a person to do something different than what they'd have done. By the time the first faint shape of morning unstitched the horizon, the world felt a little taller. Santa pulled into a distribution center that opened like a mouth onto the yard and yawned forklifts into motion. She checked in with a clerk who wore a sweater despite the heat and said words carefully in the way of someone who didn't want to step on anyone's morning. The doc took her. The pallets walked off the trailer under other hands. She signed the screen with a stylus that barely wanted to leave a mark, but did. The sun found the edges of things. Birds took the wires and pretended the wires were branches. She climbed back into the cab for the small ritual of making the space right for sleep. Blanket where it goes. Shoes set easy by the step. Window cracked enough to hear the world be alive but not eager. Before she lay down, she opened the atlas to the page where her own small thank you Saturday. Another sentence had appeared, faint as breath on cool glass. Got your note. The bend still tries people. Pass it on. She sat very still, her hand a small shelter above the words without touching them. The yard clinked and clanged its own music. Somewhere far, a whistle did not blow. She picked up her pencil and wrote, 2 turns ahead of where she'd been, on a page she'd be unlikely to need for a week or more. Be wary of the orchard fog. If the dog looks past you, it's not unkindness. If you smell pennies, treat shadows like fences. She wasn't sure why the last bit felt true. She didn't ask the world to prove it. Later, far out on a flat break of road where sunflowers lifted their heads as the sun got its modest courage up, she would drive through a place where the air ironed itself small, and she would give the shadows their due without pretending they made a map. A week on, at a cool dusk when the truck had gotten used to a different run, she pulled into a diner with a parking lot big enough for 4 rigs and a sign whose E flickered without apology. A driver 2 stools down ate eggs at 6 in the evening with the seriousness of someone who could and would defend the practice. He asked whether anyone still kept paper maps or whether that was a grandparent thing now. Santa looked at her hands and said, I keep one. He nodded like someone had given him license. He said a man once left a note on a map that turned out to be worth more than the book. Another driver on the way out turned and tapped the side of his head with a knuckle, a gesture not of superstition but of attention. The margins are crowded in places, he said, not like a warning so much as a simple truth. On a later night, the phone would fail again for a while. The atlas would hum its quiet paper hum. In a different county, a new pencil line need a surgery would tell her to skip the rightmost bay at a certain fuel stop because the handle would snag and stick. She would follow the advice and avoid an extra 10 minutes of pulling and apologizing to plastic. She would add, in her own hand, a note about a rest area where a janitor put fresh flowers in the men's and women's sinks on Tuesdays because grace like that deserved to be repeated. And once, deep in the long hours when night has had its fill and dawn hasn't taken its seat yet, the CB would crackle with a voice that said, in a tone tired but grateful, whoever wrote the thing about the West Pump at Wickers appreciates you. She would be alone in her cab and smile and not answer. Not because she'd deny it, but because it felt like a gift better opened in private. She would tap her atlas, gentle as knocking on a friend's door, and the atlas would not respond, because it didn't need to. She didn't ask where the words came from. She didn't decide it was anything other than what it was. A book in a truck in a dark hour, with margins that made room for people to look out for each other without needing to share names. If a person wanted to think inheriting caution and passing it on was something more, all right. If a person wanted to think it was simply the way roads learned us as we learned them, that worked too. Sana drove, and the pages kept quiet, or spoke as the night required. She kept her hands where they felt sure. She let her eyes do their circuit and her breath do the same. Once, near a town whose crossroads had a marquee sign that said, "Be kind today," in letters rescued from a broken price board, she picked up the atlas in daylight to see whether the faint writing looked different when the sun had opinions. It didn't. It looked the same, thin and exact, the way pencil looks when someone presses only as hard as they need to. She turned the pages slowly, lightly, respectful of a book that had become something like a companion. In the very back, on that flyleaf with the erased name, new letters hovered where old had been, "Leave room." For what? The book did not say. Santa didn't need it to. She shut the atlas soft and set it on the seat. The road stretched. The orchards breathed. Somewhere ahead, fog would settle and then lift. Somewhere behind, someone would think of a person they'd never met and write a word they hoped would reach them. Story number 6. The prairie at night took its time. It did not hurry him with curves or dazzle him with cities. It laid itself flat and let the truck decide what the evening should be. Cal ran a long diagonal through county after county that knew the sound of grain dryers and the sigh of irrigation pivots. He hauled a trailer full of old Joy arcade cabinets, pinball machines, a jukebox or two, bound for a small museum that specialized in bringing light back to things that had once commanded rooms. Each cabinet was strapped as if it were all that stood between his reputation and gravity. He had used moving blankets like quilts and foam like bread dough. No one would say he didn't take care. Every now and then, even with the power strips unplugged and the breakers off, something in the load would click a soft knock as a coil released a thought held too long, or a spring settled and remembered how much it had been asked to do for decades. It wasn't eerie. It was more like a house cooling at night. Those sounds kept him company with the low thread of the radio, and the mile markers drawing their soft white line through the corner of his eye. The highway crossed rails at a slant farther east than he was used to. He could tell by the straight shot of black tree line beyond the fields, and the way the drainage ditches changed their mind and ran parallel for a while. The first crossbuck sign came up out of the soybean dark like a letter waiting to be opened. He saw the lights of the grade crossing from half a mile out. Dark now, patient in their metal caution. It was one of those quiet zone crossings. Horns were forbidden, the little town nearby preferring sleep to long wails. 4 gates, 2 tracks. He'd seen it in daytime once, and it hadn't owned a surprise then. His CB sat on 19, turned low, a neighborly habit. At this hour, it mostly held weather, a passing complaint. Somebody offering advice no one asked for about where to get the best pie 2 counties back. He let it murmur. As he eased down toward the crossing, another voice cut thin through the speaker, too neat to be someone leaning on a mic. Defect detector, milepost 21, 8.3, temperature 7 to 2, no defects. The phrasing was exact in a way human words rarely are. Then a click, small and final. The radio returned to the usual noise. He frowned a little. He didn't run with a railroad scanner. Friends of his did, and kept track of trains the way others kept track of ball scores. He hadn't picked up a detector broadcast on the CB before. Odd, but nothing more. Ahead, the crossing stayed as it had been. Silent, dark, untroubled. The closer he came, the more the air felt pressed down, as if a hand had been placed over the world like a lid to keep heat in. His load knocked gently somewhere in the mid-trailer, 2 quick taps that reminded him of the pinball cabinets he had loved when he was young. The little solenoid that slapped a ball back into play had a particular voice. Tap, tap. The crossing bell, unlit, unblinking, answered with nothing. He put his foot against the brake. Not a stop, not even a slow, more a courtesy to the feeling spreading through the cab. 50 yards out, the lights woke. Red alternated red, neat as a heartbeat. Gates descended with the smooth choreography of machines that had been checked last Tuesday. He rolled to a full stop right where the painted line asked cars to expect themselves. He hadn't seen the approach of any headlight yet. In the long seconds that followed, he watched the far trees and let his eyes do that soft focus that finds movement better than a stare. A headlamp arrived steady and exact, and his shoulders settled because steadiness is the language of trains when everything is right. The horn did not sound. Quiet zone. The bell at the crossing began somehow, a breath after he began to hear it somewhere else, like the land had rung first and the metal had decided to be polite and catch up. The engine slid through. Newer paint flaked a little already by weather and wind. Container cars followed, long as a sermon, their sides wavering slightly in heat that still clung at 2 in the morning. The last car took its time, then the bell stopped. The lights steadied dark. The gates rose with their respectable tempo. He crossed when given permission and not before. As he rolled over the flangeways, the load tapped again, one tap, now, as if someone inside the trailer had made a note and turned to another page. Fields closed in again after the rails. The road traced a creek that couldn't be seen and didn't want to be heard. A watchman's shack stood empty against the black, like a word out of a book no one had assigned in years. Cal drifted his thoughts toward the museum. He had walked that building once before, a former freight depot with a floor that had decided it loved scuffs. He had seen a woman in a red sweater coax a jukebox to sing again, with nothing more than patience and a careful hand. He wondered if the machines in his trailer understood that they would be allowed to be loud there. The CB hissed with the small arguments of drivers swapping preferences about tires. He was about to turn it down further when the precise voice returned. Thinner now, as if traveling through more air, not less. Defect detector. Milepost 206.1. Total axles 164. Speed 4-2. No defects. Cal could picture the little shack that spoke those words, beige box on a gravel bed beside the tracks. A small antenna. Air conditioner that coughed in August. The mileposts ticked backward in his mind. He would cross those rails again if his route held. He made a place for that knowledge and kept his truck right where it felt loyal. An hour on, outside a town that had decided not to get any larger, another crossing waited. The road rose a little before the tracks. A small hill that always did more to headlights than was fair. He approached slower than he needed to and didn't mind. Something in the load chattered 3 light knocks, idly impatient. Then the CB sighed, and the same clean phrase laid itself out. Nearer this time. Defect detector, milepost 199.8. Dragging equipment detector activated. Track 2. A breath of nothing. The motor in the cab's vent hesitated, and then made up its mind to continue. Stop and inspect. The crossing ahead stayed dark. The air around him felt packed with cotton. He did not take orders from disembodied voices, but he did respect the fact that sometimes the little peculiarities of a night wanted to be heard. He pulled onto the shoulder, clicked on the hazards, and stepped down into air that smelled like rain though nothing had fallen. He did his walk around with the kind of attention that defies laziness. On the passenger side, halfway back, a strap whispered its complaint. The webbing had begun to fray at an edge, where it kissed a corner, too honest. He tightened and retied, used a bit of scrap cardboard to give it a kinder surface, and felt the tension settle into proper, quiet strength. That done, he climbed back up. The crossing lights began their red waltz as his door shut. Gates came down. He put the truck in gear and let it idle forward to be seen by anything that needed to see him. A light approached, low and steady as patience. It was not an engine. A high-rail maintenance truck rolled through the crossing, tires and flanged wheels in agreement for once. A figure in the cab lifted a hand to him, 2 fingers and a thumb, a blessing in this county. Behind it, like a sentence one writes after remembering a clause that mattered. A short string of grain hoppers came, an engine older than the others he'd seen wearing the livery of a company that had long since married someone else and changed its name. The man in the window wore a cap brim low. Cal thought he saw a lantern on a hook just inside the cab door, a thing that didn't belong in this decade, but it might have been a reflection of his own dash. The train passed. The lights stilled. They shared the road again. In a few miles, a town put a diner beside a siding and painted it a color no one could agree on. Cal pulled in because even when you don't need to, a cup and the presence of other people can small change a night into something friendlier. The counter had photographs under glass of men with hats, women with clipboards, kids on steps of cabooses with the posture of children who have not yet learned to look bored in pictures. The coffee arrived in a white mug with a thick lip like a pillar candle. The woman pouring it wore a name tag that said Guinea and a wristwatch whose face had trains where numbers should have been. He asked her whether the detector voice he'd heard was usual on the CB. "Around here?" she said, leaning her weight onto one hip with the balance of someone who has stood in a lot of rooms and chosen exactly what to carry. Now and then, old microwave towers wake up when the air gets pressed right, bounce voices around like they're not done being useful. Folks used to plan by those detectors. They still do. Some. Trains don't have to be where the voice says for the voice to be true. If it talks close, we get considerate about crossings. Some nights the land remembers schedules better than the companies. A man at the far end, boots muddy with honest work, turned his mug halfway as though he'd used this gesture to buy time before. Heard one tell me no defects once, and I was hauling a trailer with a loose latch. Not the same kind of detector, different alphabet. But I pulled over and saved myself a fifth-born's language. He grinned down into his coffee like someone who'd been pleased to be wrong for once. Cal ate a piece of pie that had more cinnamon in it than most people would dare, and let the talk wash him down to a quieter place. When he paid, Ginny lifted a finger and said, "Next crossing north of the river, got new gates. But the ground under the south approach softens after midnight. Don't take your steers too close to the fog line. It's honest ground till it isn't." He took her advice like a small charm and set it on his dash in his mind. Back outside, the night had woken a little. The smell of cut hay ran greedy and then faded. He climbed. The road poured itself over a wide flat of water held back by the patient will of a dam, then flattened and told him to look left where the tracks ran ragged, four abreast for a stretch, a makeshift yard leaning toward dawn. The CB had gone to ground, as if satisfied it had done its job by interrupting him twice. He turned it down to a murmur and let it be. As he neared the next crossing, the load behind him made a sound he had never heard from dead cabinets. A chuckle, almost, the rolling click of a score reel, counting up by ones. The hair at the back of his neck didn't stand. He smiled without showing teeth. "You'll get to play soon," he said under his breath, the way someone might to a dog strapped in the back. The lights went red ahead. The gates took their time as if assessing their own hinges. He stopped a little further back than the line suggested. The asphalt to the right looked darker, and when glare slid across it, a hair wet. He remembered Ginny's hand pointing like a warning flag toward nothing in particular. He played the last minutes in his head, the detector voice listing axles that belonged to no engine he could see, the high rail truck, the old paint on the short train's nose, pieces that could be nothing and were allowed to be something until proven otherwise. He waited so long he began to suspect a false alarm in the machinery. The wind lifted and set a paper cup rolling lazily along the shoulder. Then a sound came through the steering wheel instead of the air, a slight thrumming as if the world had swallowed a low note and needed a moment to digest it. An engine appeared, blue and clean and as unremarkable as a pickup truck in a parking lot, pulling a single car that looked like a passenger coach that had been taught geometry. It faded a diode bright in places. It wore instrument antennas like Finch's. A geometry car, one of those strange surveyors the railroad sent to see if rails had decided to settle or shift. He watched its instruments stare into the night. It rolled by as glad to ignore him as anything he'd ever met. The gates rose. The lights dimmed. He crossed and felt the paving give under his right front tire, not as a danger, only as a suggestion that it preferred lighter things. Morning lined the horizon with chalk. Cal adjusted his world to the new light. Barns revealed themselves, roofs held down by old tire stacks and the will of farmers. The truck hummed the kind of contentment that came with work done at the rate work wanted to be done. He took the long turn toward the town where the museum waited and breathed a small relief that did not need explanation. Many nights have a moment when the hardest part decides not to show up, and after that, everyone is kinder. The museum lived in a former depot with brick that had learned patience. The woman in the red sweater remembered him by sight and made space for his wheels with the authority of someone who had jammed good things into tight rooms many times. Men with gloves gentle enough for glass but strong enough for crates came to take the cabinets down one by one and set them like sleeping animals along the wall. Cal stood back and did what the good ones do. Offered help only when hands were asked for, stood solid when a wedge needed to be tapped in, kept his words light. When they finished, the red-sweatered woman pressed a cold bottle of water into his hand and nodded toward a table where small, dead things slept. "If you want to see something peculiar, you've brought it," she said. He glanced at the pinball machine nearest him. High speed with a cop car painted in a grin and lights running sideways that had no power to run yet. One light blinked, not a flash bright enough to brag. A slow, tired blink like a person trying to remember the punchline. He went outside to do his final walk, because habit is a pillow he trusts. On his driver's side step, where a person would place a boot coming down, a brass key lay in a posture that asked to be noticed. It was not a house key. It had a long, hollow stem and a beard the shape of a sideways S. He knew it from a picture he had seen years back in a line at a hot dog stand that occupied a corner of a train museum. An Adlake switch key. Railroad. Not a thing that trucks need. Not a thing that should have been able to climb up his steps without someone to lift it. He picked it up and weighed it in his palm. Cold, then warm as his hand insisted it be. He took it inside. "You lose this?" he asked, trying to make the question airy as a joke. The woman in the red sweater took it with care and exhaled the kind of laugh that has more memory than humor. "Been looking for one like this," she said. "We want to lock the old switch stand on the yard display so toddlers don't give themselves a scare. Funny thing, one went missing from a box last winter. We assumed we had put it somewhere safe and then forgotten where safe was. I guess safe was your step." He didn't explain about the detectors or the bells that had rung in the air before the lights. He didn't want to paint the night with a brush too fine or too coarse. He simply nodded, and before he left, took a walk along the short strings of track the museum kept, rails sweetened with a coat of oil like a memory. A photo inside showed a crossing watchman in a tie and a cap, standing at a little hut that had once stood 2 blocks away. A typed card beneath said, "Mr. K. Jones, who waved lantern at night for 30 years, known for staying an extra shift if the fog rolled in." Some said he could hear trains before the bell did. Cal set the key down on the glass so the woman could claim it, and smiled at the idea of people doing a job so long that they became a part of a town's lungs. He said his goodbye the way drivers do, with a hand that meant until not ending. He climbed back into his truck, the step politely empty of any further gifts. Days later, running another road in a different night, the CB breathed the same neat voice through its speaker. "Defect detector. Milepost 302.7. No defects." He was nowhere near that line. On his back deck, a pinball cabinet made a single, crisp knock, a sound that had no business being in motion and yet was there. He wasn't sure whether the sound came from a mechanical memory or some bit of air that liked to speak to him now and then. He put his palm to the wheel, honoring the habit people in his work learned. Thank the road in the exact size it helps you. He eased his speed not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. The crossing ahead, a different county, different lights flashed early, generous with its warning. A car rolled up on the other side, hesitated, then stayed. They passed one another's gaze without meeting it. The rail sang to itself and then stopped. If you asked him later what he believed about it, he would have said nothing you could pin to a page. He would have told you that nights have their small voices, and that sometimes they speak through things built to make lives easier. He would say he'd rather be accused of waiting too long at a red light than of going too quick past one, and he'd mean it. And when the neat voice came again from somewhere behind the air, listing the temperature and the number of axles, he would listen, not to argue, not to obey like a rule, but to borrow the patience of something that counted as its own kind. In a railroad town 2 states away, where a train museum gave the old watchman's lantern a corner and a card, an Adlake key hung on a peg with a new tag that said "Found." Cal looked at it through glass on a day off when he let himself walk streets he'd driven past for years without stopping. He read the placard that told him what he already understood. Some doors open from both sides when you turn the right thing in the right way. He stepped back into the afternoon. A train somewhere far ran its horn, with a rhythm that sounded neither sad nor glad, just useful. He smiled, not much, and went to get his truck. The prairie waited. The bells would ring when they wanted to. He would be ready to hear them. Story number 7. Between mesas, the highway ran arrow straight, a pale seam through sage and sand. The kind of dark that doesn't hide much, so much as make you admit there isn't much to hide. Dee kept her rig steady at 58, the number her truck liked on long flat nights when wind talked nonsense, and then let it go. She hauled cartons of canned soup and tea and shelf-stable milk, bound for a reservation grocery 200 miles ahead. In the mirror, her trailer wore its marker lights like a small constellation in obedient rows. The dash glowed low, gauges content. Her thermos cup, scarred by years of cup holders that never quite fit, sat within easy reach, steam long gone but comfort still there. She liked road furniture. That's what an old mentor called it. Everything humans set out to make sense of motion. Signs that told a story in 4 words. Reflectors that winked and then forgot you. mileposts that ticked like a clock you had to chase. She trusted a good arrow board and a modest detour and a cone with its stripes unpeeled. Without them, the road was a river with no banks. With them, a person could find the right bend to follow. She noticed the first barrel 2 miles past the county line. It stood alone at the edge of the shoulder like a bright orange guest who had arrived early and didn't know where to put their hands. No tape, no flashing light on top, no cousin barrels clustered into meaning. It shone back at her beams and then fell into darkness behind without argument. She told herself a crew must have lost one and would come back to fetch it at dawn. Another barrel turned up 5 miles later. This one lay on its side in the shallow V where pavement met gravel, a scuff on its reflective band like a thumbprint. Dee moved a half-foot farther left without thinking. The barrel didn't ask for it, but politeness had saved her more than once. She passed a third barrel set daintily over a post where a reflector should have been. There was no pattern yet, not one she could name. She let her eyes do their circuit left mirror, right mirror, gauges, road, and let the orange sit in her attention like a penny in a pocket. The road began to dress itself for a change. Windsocks rose on poles every mile or so, limp for now but known to wake in a hurry. Signs warned of gusts with exclamation marks that someone had meant kindly. The pavement darkened ahead where a wash crossed under paint comes off different over places where water has opinions. Far to the right, a line of dark announced a shallow canyon with no pretense to drama. It just existed, and the highway obliged by bending to pass alongside it. At the notch where the median narrowed, she saw it, a line of barrels where there shouldn't be any at this hour, placed with the exactness of hands that had done this all their lives. 6 cones on a taper, a gap, 4 cones, a single, noble one at the tip, like a careful point of a pen making a serif. An arrow board sat dark on a trailer just beyond, the kind with its bulbs organized into chevrons even when they slept. No trucks. No flaggers in reflective vests rolling their wrists in that useful slow-down motion. No rumble from a compressor, just barrels and the quiet hum of stored caution. Dee pulled into the taper obediently and let the lane closest to the canyon go to darkness. It was second nature barrels, ask and you listen. The road carried on. The barrels ended. She drifted back with her blinker ticking, more ceremony than necessity, the sound calming in its small certainty. 19. Anyone catch a night crew eastbound 52? She asked into the CB. Low and polite. Static gave her half sentences and an opinion about a coffee chain too far north to matter here. Then a voice that always sounded like it had been smiling before the mic came up said, "Negative, sister. Saw barrels sitting up lonely as fence posts. Maybe county started early and went home. Copy," she said, and left it. The radio listened to itself for a while, and then wandered off to talk about a storm, 2 states away. The barrels made a kind of breadcrumb trail as she approached the canyon. They showed up where they had no business being and then stood like they owned the place. And each one had that same scuff 2 fingers, almost a handprint, grubby in a way that clean rain doesn't make. Dee felt the prickle between shoulder blades that says you're not being watched so much as noticed. The way a road notices every axle and returns the favor in grooves only the eye as old as the pavement can see. The canyon didn't have a name on her map. That made sense. Not everything small earns a sign. It ran close to the highway for a 1/4 mile, a shoulder's width between asphalt and drop, bordered by a guardrail that had waved a few quiet dents into being, and then gone on doing the job. A median crossover sat there, a little triangle of pavement connecting the eastbound to the westbound for officers and crews who needed options. It wore the usual admonishment, authorized vehicles only. Dee had been taught to treat those triangles like private property. They belonged to the people who keep the rest of it safe. A touch of cloud stepped in front of the moon. The air thickened without cooling. Up ahead, something in the dark took on a shape not quite right. She couldn't have told you what she saw. It was more the lack of what should have been there. A faint ribbon of reflective paint on the right that didn't catch. The weak shine of a sign face that didn't show its heart. Barrels moved. She didn't see them move. She saw the before and the after, and had to fill the space between. Where the shoulder widened toward the crossover, a new taper had appeared while she watched the wrong thing. 3 barrels, then 2, then 1, coaxing her gently off her lane and into the median triangle, as if a careful hand guided a child from a curb to a safer step. Her foot lightened on the throttle. She set her hazards as if explaining herself to the dark. She checked her mirror not out of worry, but out of habit never to make anyone else's day worse, and found the road behind empty for a mile or more. Red markers blinking a slow Morse along the edge. She took the taper, slow enough to read it. Tires rolled over clean paint and then rougher patch, then clean again. The truck leaned with the insulted dignity of a big thing being asked to do a small thing. She put her left steer exactly where the crossover's crown wanted it, and eased to a stop perpendicular to the lanes, a patient anchor across the median facing westbound, her trailer still wearing east. It was an odd place to pause, but the barrels gave her a nod somehow, and she took the nod. Her hands were mild as she waited. She did not lock the brakes. She held with her foot, breathing with the truck, letting the night decide what it was doing next. Somewhere far up the grade, two lights took the road wrong. They ran too bright and too fast and too hungry, oily on the blacktop like spills. They belonged to a car that had found itself on eastbound lanes headed west. Wrong side of the Jersey barriers where they existed, wrong lane where they didn't. The red temp light for the bit of dash she never used flickered once and then remembered itself. Dee did nothing heroic. She did nothing at all. The car took the space where her NWS truck had been and would have been if she'd declined the invitation. It whickered past at a speed that belonged to a different hour and a different road. In that quick second, she caught the shape of a driver hunched forward in the way of someone who thinks closeness to the wheel will make the world oblige them. The car's taillights cut and then dipped, and then were just the notion of red and dark. Sound took a moment to catch up, then repaid the debt with the low yowl of rubber saying it had had enough. Back in the eastbound lane beyond, a pair of blue strobes bloomed small and distant. A trooper had set up to catch what the scanner must have warned about. The wrong way lights disappeared around a bend. Blue lights moved off the shoulder and then back like a net being cast that would maybe catch and maybe not. Dee exhaled in a way she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The barrels, faithful to their little geometry, had finished their work. She waited until the trooper's strobes scribbled to a stop and, somewhere far, served whoever needed serving. Then she nosed across the triangle again into her proper lane. The barrels stood as she left them. 3, 2, 1. A peeled orange segment of certainty in the middle of the night. She rolled the rest of the canyon with no more drama than the soft clack of seam joints under her steers, and the whisper of wind rehearsing the way it wants to talk when the sun comes up. Her CB woke with a burst of conversation from the westbound. Wrong way at 69, heads up, and then the usual chorus of thanks and cautions. She said nothing. She had nothing to add but gratitude, and she gave that out loud to no one and everything. Beyond the canyon, a safety turnout opened like a side porch. An old thing from before people decided cars could always be persuaded to behave. A sign on a pipe fence called it Dixon Canyon Pull-Off. White paint weathered to cream. Dee signaled and pulled in, hazards off now, her truck making polite noises as it settled a little. She climbed down. The air held that desert midnight chill that finds elbows first. The pull-off held a picnic table whose top had been carved with considerate initials, neat and centered, the way people who believe in taking care mark their memories. On a post nearby, a plaque hung, simple and pretty, because someone took the time. It said in clean letters, "For the crew who kept us between the barrels, who asked the night to slow down." 3 names. A date that wasn't last year, and wasn't long ago either. No more information than that, because none was needed. By the curb, half in gravel, half on asphalt, lay an orange sleeve like the top of a barrel's light had been unscrewed and left to cool. Dee picked it up without meaning to. It had a stenciled number on it, District 5, and a black smear like a set of 2 fingers had pushed it into place. It was nonsense to think it had been put there for her. She set it on the picnic table so someone who needed it might know where to find it. Back on the road, she kept her speed a hair under what the sign allowed, not as a rule but as a courtesy extended to the night for being decent. The wrong way chatter on 19 slowed. Someone reported that they'd seen the car a mile down the far shoulder, with 2 squad cars turned sideways freshening their tires' tread. The report held no cruelty. It sounded like rain called from a roof to a roof. Dawn had not claimed even the farthest part of the horizon when she found a truck stop huddled in a wash where cottonwoods like to test the wind. The sign hummed. The E flickered in a steady way that made it look like it was breathing. She parked far from the building the way people who drive long naps prefer, nose out, in case leaving quickly mattered later. Inside, the clerk had news on a TV with the volume mercy low. People moved like a small town at a potluck, not in a hurry, arranged by the natural gravity of conversation. Dee bought a coffee she would not finish, and a breakfast burrito she did not yet want, and kept both anyway because that's how these nights teach you. Keep gifts, even if they are not the kind you thought you needed. A man in a county windbreaker, with reflective stripes, stood near the condiment station and poured sugar into his cup like a careful experiment. He noticed the sleeve of orange on the passenger seat through her open cab door as she came back out. "You run through Dixon?" he asked, nothing but neighbor in his voice. "An hour back," she said. "Your crew setting barrels ton early?" He shook his head with a little smile that knew more than it owed. "Not tonight. Wind's supposed to stay polite till noon. We don't send folks out in the dark unless we have to." He took a sip and considered her like yard dogs. Consider whether they want to come close. That canyon's particular, though. We lost. We had an incident there a couple years. Folks got clipped. We put a plaque up. He gestured vaguely in the direction she'd just come from. "Some nights, people tell me they see our work when we ain't working." He laughed in the kind of dry way that keeps the spooks friendly. "Barrels have a mind, or the wind does. Either way, I don't argue if someone says something told them to mind the triangle." She didn't say what she'd seen, because they both knew he'd heard his share. He reached into a cardboard box at his feet and pulled out a small collapsible triangle, the emergency kind, red like a warning and pointed like a finger, and handed it to her. "We keep extras," he said. "Put this in the side box. Not everything needs an orange drum to say slow down." She took it, feeling its light weight and its promise. "Thanks. Don't thank me," he said, and tipped his cup as if toasting someone she couldn't see. She drove on. The road decided to grow more curves, and then, having tried that on, relaxed back into honest straight. The sun finally thought about throwing a ribbon into the sky, and then committed. A hawk found a thermal and hung there like punctuation. The delivery in the small town came easy. The grocery's owner had a way of standing that said his back had done its time, and his eyes were friends. Teenagers with early morning hair pushed carts and felt heroic without saying so. Dee docked and dropped the freight, and signed and smiled, and made sure her trailer looked like a good room before she closed it. On the way out of town, she passed a maintenance yard, chain-link fence tidier than most, orange drums nested in tall stacks like a row of unusually cheerful soldiers at ease. She pulled to the curb, put on her hazards, and took the sleeve from her passenger seat. She wrote a note on torn receipt paper with a pencil blunt enough to make letters round. "Found at Dixon Pull-Off. Thank you for the triangles." She slid the sleeve through the gap between fence and ground and left it there, orange face up like a flower. That night, hours and a state away, her route crossed a river where the old highway ran parallel for a bit like a companion who didn't want to say goodbye yet. The wind rose all at once, as if it had misread the day's schedule and had to make up time. Barrels stood in the median on the far bank. They had reason there. A crew had milled a lane and left it to new asphalt's grit. She eased as she always did. Still, she watched the dance of orange and white in a new way, open to the idea that not every barrel wore a person's hand behind it and still acted like kindness. Sometime after midnight, on a stretch where the line between two counties switched patrol zones and radio frequencies and maybe a little luck, she saw 3 cones set neat on the shoulder at the start of a long straight. They didn't warn of a lane closure. They didn't ask for obedience. They just sat, a little altar of caution. She slowed a hair on instinct alone. A deer half changed its mind about crossing, then fully changed it back. Dee smiled. She touched the hazard switch twice in a small salute no one needed to see. Ahead, the cones would be gone. Behind, they would be there for the next traveler, or they wouldn't, which is the same as saying the night would do what it does and people would do what they could. In the weeks after, when winds lifted dust like linen and then let it gently settle, when rain turned the lines glossy and then reasonable again, she told the story not as a story with a point, but as a thing that happened. She said, "I took a median I wasn't supposed to, and didn't get scolded for it." She said, "Barrels are better at their jobs than we are at ignoring them." Sometimes a driver would answer, "They moved for me once." Sometimes they would just nod like you do when you've learned not to argue with something that's been working longer than you've been breathing. One dusk, she pulled into a different canyon's turnout and set the little red triangle the county man had given her near the base of a sign that warned trucks not to use brakes like broadcasts. No one had broken down. No one needed her. But it felt right to place a piece of warning where someone would use it the next time a hood came up and a heart rate did too. She left it with the feeling you get when you pass a cup of water down a line in summer. Small. Almost nothing. Absolutely the point. On a much later night, when the air had that crackle of change that comes before a season admits itself, the CB carried a voice from a county she knew by the color of its dirt. "Heads up near Dixon," the voice said. "Barrels out for an incident. Might save you a surprise." It could have been a crew. It could have been a guy who knew a guy. It could have been the wind doing its old tricks. Dee smiled, light and sure, and said, "Copy," and gave the wheel a little tap like a handshake. Out there, the road had its ways. Some of them had orange stripes. Some of them had none at all. She kept her eyes moving and her hands easy, and when she came to the place where help had stood for her once, she flicked her hazards once out of habit and respect. If the barrels noticed, they didn't show it. They didn't need to. They have a way of asking the night to slow down, and more nights than not, it does. And that ends tonight's journey, 7 unbelievable horror trucker stories from the highways where truth and terror blur into one. Out there, past the glow of your dashboard, the night still hides things no one can explain. If these stories kept you company through the dark, give this video a like. It helps us keep the wheels turning through the night. And if you're new here, subscribe to The Sleep Haunt so you never miss another drive into the strange and the unknown. Until next time, keep your lights bright, your doors locked, and your eyes on the road. Good night and safe travels wherever the miles may lead.